Welcome to the Liz McMullen Show. I have a friend of mine, my GCLS sister, BL Miller, is on my show. Welcome on the show.
Well, thank you.
So there's a rumor that you occasionally write them books.
Just a little bit. Every once in a while. It's a vicious lie put out by my publisher.
The things that they do, the lies that they share. So, of course, I'm gonna click over to my notes so that I don't flub something. Love in the Catskills. So, you live in upstate New York. Is that one of the reasons why you decided to write a historical set in that general environment?
Yes, it made it a lot easier to be right here and have access to a lot of the historical stuff. Love in the Catskills. The whole idea of picking the Catskills it's kind of funny. I just went hiking one day. And I went into this little corner store on North Mountain, and they had this book about this place called the Catskill Mountain House. And I thought, what's that? That sounds interesting. And I went on my hike, and I came across this land at the edge of an escarpment, and there was this big historical marker there talking about this Catskill Mountain House and how it was this famous resort and how, its importance in New York history. And I was like, wow, and the views and everything. And right there, I got the idea, wouldn't it be great to write a story where you have these incredibly rich people that came up from the city to summer in the Catskills back before air conditioning?
Lord have mercy. I lived in the Berkshire. I went to Mount Holyoke, so I lived in the Berkshires one stupid summer, and it's hot. It gets really hot up in that business.
Yeah, but in that part of the Catskills, compared to New York City at the time, in the summers, it was beautiful. They had, it's the top of the mountains. It had grand views. The temperature was actually cooler to a degree, and it became the place for the upper percentages of the New York rich and famous, and even worldwide, to come and spend time there. It really became the Gucci of resorts, and it was one of the first major resorts. People would either go to Saratoga for the natural springs, or they went to the Catskills to go to the Catskill Mountain House. Presidents stayed there. Jenny Lind, great actors of the time. And
there's a lot of romanticizing that, those huge honking houses in the middle of nature, all different time ranges. And then obviously when Dirty Dancing came about, things were petering out and people weren't so interested in going there. They were interested in going other places. But I've seen, because I like watching documentaries, I've seen, I know it's just terrible habit of liking history, these beautiful expansive mansions and properties like in the middle of of the mountains and stuff like that. Totally beautiful. And all I could think of when you were talking about like the history is just like, well, it will smell a great deal better than New York City would at that particular time. I mean, all I could think was like, oh my God, people didn't even bathe on a regular basis then,
Yep, they didn't have reliable, clean sanitation.
Nope.
Your streets smelled. You had horses, so that added to the smells.
I don't even. I know. I couldn't do it. I couldn't. I can deal with the stinkiness of New York now. Like I grew up around it. I'm accustomed to it. I grew up on the Hudson, but not on the palatial, gorgeous in the woods Hudson. Like I grew up a little bit farther away from the Palisades, so essentially it's the same thing as growing up in Brooklyn or growing up, in the shadow of that beautiful view. The thing that I have to say is like, yeah, you can live in Manhattan, but we have the view of Manhattan. People who are living there don't get to see that. So, were you a tomboy growing up, getting dirty in mud puddles? Like, right?
Pretty much. I was never a girly girl. I also tended to be alone a lot. So I'd often just be indoors with a book or with the TV or with the cats. Not a very physically fit person. I've pretty much been overweight since I turned 10. So I didn't spend a lot of time outdoors. Probably about 2-3 years ago, I started hiking, and I really enjoyed that. And I found that I've come to love nature, and have really started to work more on being able to be out more, be out in nature, walk around, hike. I love to hike.
I've been doing a similar thing. You know, I realize how ludicrous it is for me to live like 4 blocks from the beach, ocean, and 4 blocks from the bay, and barely ever go there. And a few months back, I kind of made a little vow to myself that I was going to go out in nature more. And so I take Quinn to the dog run, which is really groovy. I mean, I wish it wasn't like a 20 to 30 minute drive from my house. But it's this huge property, and there's a hiking trail along the right side, which is about 1/4 mile. And so the dogs can run in and out of the woods, but the woods are only about between 30 and 50 yards wide, so you don't have to worry about losing them. And then there's this huge, like at least 2 to 3 feet football fields lengths of sand that they can just like run like the Dickens. So you go through the woods around the bend, and then there's the run, and they can go crazy, and then you can keep going. And I can't tell you what a difference it's made in my life to like actually be out in the, out in the sun, in the woods, going for walks along the ocean and stuff like that. I really like it. And it's not that I never knew I liked it, but now I'm like, get off your ass, out of your office. I don't care if you have work to do. You need to go outside. And
I live in Albany, well, right next to Albany, and so I'm right in between the Catskills and the Adirondacks. And for the overwhelming, almost all my life, I never visited either place. I've now hiked in the Catskills, I've hiked in the Adirondacks, I've hiked on the edge of the Berkshires, and I can't believe how much I've missed. Just letting myself be trapped in my body and being trapped indoors. It's amazing. I love being out in the nature, and it's inspiring.
So it's influenced your writing. Do you feel like you've become a better writer now that you're kind of expanding what your world is, like expanding beyond your home to go on,
I think so, because I find that it fits nicely into the characters and into the storylines, and instead of always having my characters indoors all the time, they're always indoors, I can now take them outdoors. I can let them go snowshoeing. I can have them go hiking. And, I don't have to just watch a documentary on the computer to know what to tell them to experience. I can actually go out there myself and do it. And in this series, the Eras of Love series, of which Love in the Catskills is the first book, there'll be several times within these books where the characters will be able to be out in nature. And it does create a different mindset.
So you said you were inspired by finding out about this getaway.
Yep.
What inspired you to create the characters that you did? Are you a pantser? Do you plan? Or like how did they come about for you?
Well, a lot of times my characters just come about with a general idea. In this case, in Love in the Catskills, it was pretty simple that the resort itself catered to the upper 10% of New York City. So it catered to the very wealthy. But it's in the middle of the mountains, and so you had a lot of the old Dutch settlers, their descendants, living in those mountains. Very simple, very financially poor people. They farmed, they were they all kind of helped each other, the neighbors. So you really had that dichotomy of characters, and I thought that was a good place to go, from this rich family that would come and visit this world of the mountains, because to them that was something different from their richiness. And then you had the local girl and the local mountain folk to whom this was a daily way of life. They thought nothing of walking 4 miles to go get something. Whereas, the people from the city, what? More than a mile, hire the carriage. Where is it?
One of the things that I think you did well, especially with Mr. Chandler and his wife, the parents of characters, was that even though they were progressive for their time, like abolitionists, and the mother was interested in women's rights and this, that, and the other thing, there's still a disconnect between classes, and there's still racism, and making all these different judgments that are appropriate to their time and place.
Yeah, and but that was realistic.
Exactly. That's what I liked, because I'm like, oh, in one breath he's talking about being an abolitionist, then another breath he's talking about how the colors work so much harder than the Irish, and if they would just send them back to Ireland, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and historically in this country it's always been one race after another, or one culture after another gets beat on, and when the new one comes in, all the others jump on top of them. Mm-hmm. And so, you'll see that again and again in the first story, and then in the subsequent books. There's always some group that gets that has that, we're so progressive and we love everybody, except those lazy Irish, or except those commie Russians, and but that was realistic. Nobody was perfect and loved every soul that came through the world. They were, in their ways. He looked his nose down on the Irish fishmonger, and
Mary was so clueless. I mean, yeah, she's a 10-year-old child, but she just had no concept of her station in life and how most people live. Oh, you share a bed? Well, we share a bath. And at first in my head, I'm like, a bath? Do they mean a bathroom, or they have to bathe together? But we have our own rooms. Oh, they have to share and whatever. And I'm just like, oh, the 5 of us are all going to be in one bed, and the 3 of us are going to be in the other bed. And, I remember my father talking about growing up in Harlem and how the boys slept in one bed and the girls slept in the other. It was like he was one of 7. That's just the way it worked. Everybody didn't get their own room, that kind of stuff.
Right, and in Hester's family, Hester and her father had moved in with an aunt, and, mountain folk, the children, okay, the girls all sleep together, the boys all sleep together. You didn't have that kind of room. And even with boarders, if you had more than one boarder, these strangers would probably share a bed. But Mary, yes, she had no clue, because she was 10 years old, raised in that society, raised in that station.
In a bubble, essentially. Like she grew up in a little happy bubble.
Yeah, in her little happy bubble, Well, of course I have different dresses. I have to wear a different dress for dinner than I wear for the day. And the whole concept of, what do you mean you only have 2 dresses?
I was surprised, actually, that Mary's mother let her play with Hester.
Yeah, well, I kind of thought about that, but Mary's mother, being the progressive that she was,
Air quotes.
Yeah, once Mary and Hester had become such good friends, it was kind of hard to separate them in the way that they just had that genuine affection for each other. She could see that Hester was a good girl, was a good person, and brought out, a positive nature of Mary that she hadn't had before. Now she started to care about other people and not just herself. Mm-hmm. She was more inclined, one time Mary and her mother are shopping, and Mary's concern is not for candies for herself, but she's now saving her pennies so that Hester can come visit, because she wants to pay for that fare for her to come down and visit. Or buying art supplies, not because she has any interest in art, but because someone else does, somebody she cares about, instead of it just always being about her.
Mm-hmm. What are some things you want to do with the series? What kind of journey, what kind of character arc do you see?
Well, the series itself is, I call it Eras of Love. And while it starts with Mary and Hester in the first couple of books, it actually is just going to follow them and their descendants through the different eras of American history.
Oh, cool.
Like the second book, which is probably about 3/4 done, takes Mary and Hester through their adulthood, into their children's lives, and toward the end their grandchildren's lives, and pulls them right up to the beginning of the century.
Oh, wow.
Right into the early 1900s, 1918. It's set to end at 1919, this book. When Mary and Hester are finally, women in New York State got the vote a year or two before nationally, as each state voted them in. So, there's a fulfillment for the suffrage arc. They actually finally do, as little old ladies, get to go vote. But then in the subsequent books, you deal with their descendants. Book 3 is set in the Roaring '20s.
Oh, fun.
And so, for example, you have Mary's granddaughter, who becomes the quintessential flapper girl. And she's all about, Prohibition in the '20s and being that rebel that they were at that time. Rebellious women in the '20s would have been trying to drive their own cars, being flapper girls, going out to the speakeasies.
Cutting their hair.
Cutting the hair down short, yep. And then between books 3 and 4, you also meet Hester's granddaughter, who actually ends up being raised by her father as a boy to pass, because he didn't really want a daughter, he wanted a son. So you have this kind of a transgender, but she still very much wants a woman, but she feels kind of trapped. And that is the 4th book that deals more with the Depression. Brother, Can You Spare a Dime, and dealing with the '30s in a city, Schenectady. No longer in its heyday, but trying to find your place. And then it goes on from there. There's in the '40s and the '50s dealing with, I believe in that one, it's Mary's second great-granddaughter. Maybe it's Hester's second great-granddaughter falls for a girl whose family is part Native American and part Russian, which is like a double whammy. Now, not only are you one of those homosexuals, but, you're in love with this, person who's from 2 different races that we cannot stand, we cannot be part of. And then the '50s, you had the communism era, the McCarthyism going on. And it moves on from there. One of the books is set in the disco era, one's set in with the muscle cars. And the tomboy, the James Dean type rebel, kicked out of the family for being gay and, trying to make her way in the world, but she doesn't conform, and how can you find anybody that, you can be with? The '80s, when we're just all starting to become a little bit more out of the closet and, oh, you have a Chris Williamson record. That's a secret sign.
Oh, the little cues.
And then the final book in the series will be Modern Times. And it ends up that Mary's 4th great-granddaughter finds an old trunk, which has her Mary's old diaries in it. Because in the first book, Mary does a lot of writing in her diaries. And she learns about the Mountain House. And she finds a genealogist who happens to turn out to be Hester's 3rd great-granddaughter. And so in the final book, you have this cycle completing itself, where the 2 women in the beginning who, in the 1800s, where circumstances and stations in life didn't really let them have everything they wanted to have. They wanted to be married and have a house with children and, everybody, and they couldn't really get that in reality. But now in the modern times, I'm bringing my girlfriend over for dinner, make something nice. It's, the modern openness that we get to enjoy now in this era, in the modern times, that they couldn't really get. So it's kind of like a full circle.
That's really cool.
To get to the last book.
That's really
cool. A lot
cool.
of referencing to the first book.
That's it. You have quite the journey ahead of you to realize all those books.
Well, yes, and it wasn't supposed to be this way.
You're so funny. It's like that should be like a catchphrase for authors.
It wasn't meant to be this way.
Authors like it wasn't meant to be this way.
It was supposed to be one book with flashbacks to the original couple. That didn't work.
Oh my
And then
Lord.
it was supposed to be 12 books, and then it became 13, and currently it's 14. And God knows I'll probably be 90 before I finish them, but...
But you're going to do it, damn it.
I'm still going to do it. As long as somebody wants to read them.
You'll be writing them.
And the characters keep yapping in my ears, I'll keep putting them out.
So who are some writers that have inspired you? Like, coming up to encourage you to try it yourself,
Well, mainstream, I always enjoyed in my younger years books by Barbara Hambly, who was a great science fiction writer. She created some wonderful worlds with strong female characters. She did a Dragon's Bane series, which was really, really good, and I could lose myself in that. Really, it was a lot of the Harlequin romance novelists, Barbara Carlton and Janet Daly, and that would just write these lovely little romances that I just kind of always liked that happy ending. I'm a sucker for the happy ending. I don't like them when they separate and go on their separate lives. I'm just a big rush, I'll say it, I'm always a mushball romantic, and I just love the happy endings. And, and then in lesfic, Mavis Applewater, she writes beautiful stories. L.J. Moss, rest her soul.
Oh, my goodness,
was
yes.
a wonderful. She wrote such classics, that you just don't want to ever let go of.
She was the one who wrote Conqueror fiction, right? Or am I, crossing my wires?
She did write some Conqueror fiction, yes, but she also had some lovely mainstream books that were really enjoyable. None So Blind was one of her best. I enjoyed that one. And, now we have, from when I started back in the late 90s with lesfic and, the Xena fanfic, to now, it's just amazing how exponentially we've grown. From having a few hundred writers, now there's thousands of us. And just about any genre you want, any plot line you want, you can find it out there. It's from vampire stories on, to us simple little romance novelists. And
so do you have a stack of books or a queue of books in your e-reader waiting on you?
Oh yeah, there's quite a few sitting in there that, I would see a post on Facebook, because I live on Facebook. I do. And I'd see something, like Andy Marquette puts out I have this little novella, and I think, oh, okay, I'll just add it on. And there's a lot sitting in my Kindle waiting. And just like there's writer improvement books sitting in my Kindle waiting to be read, and cookbooks, and that looks good. Yeah, I get quite the bundle of books. But yeah, I do. And then my friends, people like Lynn Ames, she puts out a new book, and I'm like, oh shit, I really got to read that soon. Yeah, there's
Did you read Eyes on the Stars?
I did not. I try to avoid, I have not read her historical books, but again, for the same reason I don't read a lot of books. I don't want to pick up anything accidentally and pull it into my story. Sometimes you just reading, you pick things up by osmosis, and I don't want to do that. But I have, seen reviews about how wonderful it was. And just like her, she's gotten a lot of acclaim for Bright Lights of Summer. And I would love to read it, but right now I can't.
Until you're done with that particular time frame.
Yes, yeah. When I'm done with that particular time frame, then I can worry about going back and reading things that were in that time frame.
So are you like a magpie and you like to read a lot of different types of things that will have, like, I guess, romantic undertone, or do you have specific genres that you find yourself more attracted to?
I tend to like mostly romances, mostly your typical modern or historical romances. I tend to look more towards them. Once in a while, I'll pick up things that are like, say, a mystery series, but it has a historical overtone or undertone. That's what I prefer. Just like in TV shows, I tend not to watch just the basic cop dramas, but ones where you might find a romantic undertone in there with the characters, something.
Nice little subplot to keep you going.
Yeah, the little subplots, to keep you going.
You have quite the job in front of you to finish the series, but I know that I know that there are a lot of little historical fiction hearts that are beating hard at the idea of this like ongoing series that you're working on. And, I hope that you keep on getting the readers so you can keep on going and make that 5,000 book series work.
I couldn't be happier with the feedback I get from people who have read it that are historical fiction and historical buffs, and they love it. And I appreciate when they say how accurate it is and how they get to see things from a different angle. And that's just so encouraging to me because it really is hours and days and weeks of research, and even the most minute little thing can take weeks to find out and to get it into the book, and then to have somebody comment on that and appreciate that is just it makes me feel good. It makes me feel like somebody appreciated all that hard work that I've done.
Very validating.
Yeah, the validation. I love it. In Love in the Catskills, there's a section about the draft riots in New York City. And most people don't even know what the draft riots were. I had no clue until I was doing this research. And when I did it, I chose to look at it from a certain angle. And I've gotten several people have given me feedback that, even if they knew about it, they never thought about it from that position.
Oh, that's really cool. I want to thank you for taking some time out of your schedule to come on my show.
Well, thank you for asking me. I really appreciate it.